So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and finally we are coming to Lango's Cardolan Outpost replay, which he sent me way back in November actually, and by the time this comes out it will be March, so it's probably about time that we got to this one. But like I said, a lot of replays that I got sent in between the point where this was sent and when it's eventually going to come out, a lot of scenarios actually came to me in that time, and also a lot of maps that I haven't necessarily seen all that much of, neither of which can really describe the Cardolan Outpost. Having said that, it's very rare that the Cardolan Outpost produces a bad battle, because it's a very well thought out map, to be honest with you. Now, I sort of liken this to THARBAD, while it isn't actually on the river itself, acting as a sort of variant on Osgiliath, which is what THARBAD really should be, including the bridge. It's the closest thing we have to THARBAD in Reforged at the moment. It'll be interesting to see what DAC do for THARBAD, because up until this point THARBAD hasn't been included in DAC either, it's just been a generic settlement. But I do believe for version 5 they're actually adding a custom settlement for it. It's probably about time as well, because it's an interesting thing for a city in the west to have that kind of feel to it. But for now, this shall be our THARBAD. And Lango is going to be on the defence today. It's actually a 4v4, so the attacking army is going to be one of those sieges where the attacking armies individually have got higher quality than the defending ones, and the defending ones have to use a little bit more guile with their melee engagements. But generally speaking, 4v4s are better for the defenders, because it means that you're not having to deal with quite the same level of numbers, and if you use your skirmish as well, you should be able to pick off even higher quality units. It's mostly lore friendly. There's sort of one switch on each side. Numenor can act as both, technically speaking, but Umbar is technically on the good side today and Numenor on the evil side, so that's really the only switch. Other than that, it is a good versus evil siege. And we have the Warius, who is going to be playing as Numenor. He has got some Numenorian Shield Guard, a very useful unit of AP Spears. Spears are fantastic at holding the line because of their animation and generally their more defensive nature. Adding armor piercing to them gives them that little bit of bite they need to be a really effective unit. And that is exactly what the Numenorian Shield Guard are. And they're a higher tier spear as well, so it really does give them a impressive leg up. Numenorian Cohort are a really good line infantry unit as well, in comparison to Umbar, which are a fairly close approximation of Numenor, at least in terms of their infantry core. The Numenorian Cohorts are a little bit more attack focused, so they'll do a little bit more damage with those swords. One of the finer line infantry units that you can get and mass up in the game. Numenorian Steel Bows, very limited ammunition, but very effective. They're the only unit of non-bodyguard armor-piercing archers in the game, I believe. So you can have 2 of them. But their ammunition is very, very low. They can be okay in melee as well, but they are one of those units that's actually quite difficult to get your money's worth from them, because you really need to target down the right kind of unit, which is hard when you're on the attack, because you may not have that luxury. On the other hand, the Seafarers of Nindamos, despite being cheaper and also suffering from that lower ammunition count, tend to be worth it almost all of the time, because it's a lot easier to use this unit. You get them close to the enemy, you throw their javelins in, and then they act as medium axe infantry, which is very, very nice. He's brought 7 of them. He's also got some Direct Iron Royal Guard, one of the best skirmishing archers in the game that Umbar and Numenor both share, and he's got some Royal Legion of Armelos and Pharazim Swordmasters. The increased unit size of the sword and board line infantry and the increased hit point count of their heavy swordsmen make Numenor's bodyguards really very, very effective indeed. Then we have Mordor, played by Y2K86. We've got some Orc archers. Always good to have these cheaper archers when you're on the attacks. It just gives the defenders something that they have to deal with, because you don't want to let these Orc archers get any sort of value. But technically they're getting value if you use your own archers against them, so it's a really awkward kind of unit to use, but that's exactly the kind of thing you'd imagine Orc archers would be used for in the first place. Ardenheim Shadowbows are a really good unit of rangers, especially in this situation, because among the rangers, they are the ones with the best defensive values because of their armour. So a very useful thing that Mordor have there. Orc fodder, of course, can just be pushed in, and as long as they're not committed on their own, where they can just be slaughtered with ease. If they're acting as a meat shield for something, that's where the Orc fodder are at their very best. Moranon infantry here, an easy unit of line infantry to mass up. They're not the best unit of line infantry, but neither are they the worst. They're quite similar to the Rudar swordsmen in that regard. Orc maulers, bit of armour piercing, will be useful against some of the defending factions. Most of them, actually, I would say. One, not so much, but we'll get to that in a moment. Some troll drummers, which of course at this point in Reforged are useless. Excuse me. But you know, they look cool at the very least, and they can still be used as regular trolls. Olakai, of course, can certainly be used as that battlefield juggernaut. Orc javelins, very cheap but very useful. Real good tool that Mordor have. Black Legion of Barad-dûr, or Black Guard of Barad-dûr. The Nazgul are in here. As long as they stay within a unit like this, the Nazgul can always be super effective. Melkor's chosen. It'll be interesting to see if there is a cavalry engagement of some sort, because this is a siege battle, but very often there are little skirmishes that do happen on the more open parts of the map on the other side of the river, so we shall see. Also some Temple Guard and a Ballista. Ballista useful on this map as well for shooting across the river, because it sort of transitions from a river crossing to a field battle to a siege, which is the phases of this battle are one of the reasons why I think this map is liked in the way that it is. Overlord is playing as Rhun, plenty of armour piercing, including in these Balkoth tribesmen. Not in the Lokenar Rim, but they do have those cosmetic fire projectiles, which look pretty cool, and they're a decent damaging archer as well, but as per the usual, I would have recommended the Variag Mercenaries when you're on the attack as Rhun, because they're a little bit more sturdy. Eastron Crossbowmen, they offer all the damage you need as well with their stopping power. A couple of units of Scion Rim to give that real solidity to your front line. They're an upper tier spear as well. They lack the armour piercing, but they are very, very tough, and important for Rhun as well, for keeping that front line in check. Several units have upgraded Eastron Clansmen as well. Very nice to have an entry-level militia unit, effectively, which can be upgraded in that way. The Gamprim, very nice armour-piercing phalanx unit, a really nice halberdier. There are better halberdiers in the game, but the Gamprim really do complement Rhun's strengths quite nicely. And then there are some Cummels chosen and several units of Flagrim as well, so the line infantry, armour-piercing, and a bodyguard. And then finally, here in the north, we can see that most of this army is probably going to be hidden. It's Angmar, played by Stalin Stepbro, and Angmar, the regular Hammer Guard without the upgrade, the Black Guard as well, so both bodyguards are here. Trolls of Gundabad, Trolls of Angmar, the mighty Witchers, which whenever Angmar are on the field, you really need to be on the lookout for the Witchers. If you can target them down as quickly as possible, that may be the key to your victory. Should be easy enough for the defenders to do on a map like this, because you can see Angmar coming from a mile away, and there are plenty of sightlines you can use archers to kill Witchers with. If they're still alive by the time the outpost itself comes into play, however, they can use the structures as cover. Scourge Raiders for throwing axes, upgraded Guardians of Cardolan for a really solid front line. I do think the armour upgrade is more useful on the Guardians of Cardolan than it is on the Witch Realm Pikemen, to be honest, because you're never really going to completely eliminate their fragility to projectiles, and the whole point of pikes is they can keep units far enough away from them to the point where they can't be attacked, really. Whereas that's not something the Guardians of Cardolan can say, so they will benefit more from the armour upgrade, I think. And a couple of units of Gundabad Guard as well, which are effectively the spear version of that tier of unit compared to the Guardians of Cardolan. A little bit weaker, perhaps, overall, but they do offer a similar kind of functionality. I imagine there's Barrow Wights as well, and probably a bunch of lower-end skirmishers. Up here, in the north corner of the map, we can see only a few of these units visible again, because this is an area where there's quite a lot of trees around. You can hide quite easily up here. We have Demon's Hunter, who is playing as Lindon. So of course armour piercing not going to be too useful against them. Mithlond Pikemen and 4 Lindon Pikemen. So a really, really good front line there, which can be used at Lindon's pace as long as they don't go out in the open and get targeted down by projectiles. That should be a really effective front line against any of the attackers, to be honest. Harland and infantry to back them up. A couple of units of them. Noldorin Blade Masters, sharing the field with the unit which took their spot as being the best heavy swordsman in the game in the Pharazim Sword Masters. And finally, we have over here, this is a really bizarre place to put your general, to be honest, the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. You don't really gain anything by putting your general in a unit like this, and you lose the ability to hide, which is a little strange, but maybe it's just a sign that Demon's Hunter is going to be saving them for later on, which is fair enough. But that's something I think you can remember to do without having to put your general in the unit as well. Then we have Lango himself playing as Cardolan, so playing on home turf. Plenty of Minhiriath units, Minhiriath Men-at-Arms, Minhiriath Sharpshooters. There's also Greenway Garrison Archers in here, a cheap unit of archers, and also some Men-at-Arms Roman Gatekeepers. Crossbow is very key for Cardolan in a situation like this, to hold those choke points. Dunedain Captains are here as well, should be pretty effective against some of the entry-level units they're facing. Bandits, we have some civilians here as well, so a pretty basic army this from Cardolan, as perhaps you would expect given that it's a 4v4 siege and he's on the defence. We'll see how well the Greenway Garrison Spears and Pikes do at holding the line, and if they can buy enough time for the Cardolan skirmishers to go about their business. He's also got a Trebuchet, which can be super effective when you're on the defence. A couple of units of Gwathlo Trackers, and some Minhiriath Archers up here as well. Then we have Shaun of Gondor, playing as Gondor, so certainly armour piercing will be useful against them. Wardens of the White Tower, some Nimlothian Honour Guard, some Fountain Guard as well, so plenty of spears as you can see. Typical Gondor. Guards of Osgiliath, some standard Gondor infantry without the armour upgrade again, a sign that in a 4v4 siege you do have to cut some corners as the defenders. Some Gondor infantry back over there as well. Even over here, this is something you don't see very often, the opening unit model for the Axeman of Lasarnak, something that has been in the game ever since Vanilla, of course, but you rarely see it now because it's often such a good idea to upgrade the armour on the Axeman of Lasarnak. It gives them that extra bit of solidity they don't really have otherwise. But on this occasion, of course, they can't afford it. And some Raven Helms of Caer Andros over here, and some more Raven Helms. Interesting indeed. And finally, we have the Imposters. Umbar playing on the side of good today, played by Son of the Dunedain, ironically enough. We have got some Corsair Blackguards, which are very similar to the Seafarers of Nindamos. We have some Balaketh Marksmen over here, some Naru Royal Guard, Belagaya Footmen, so plenty of skirmishers here, which makes a certain amount of sense. Umbar are very comfortable in a long-range skirmish fight, and I would imagine there's a few hidden units around here as well. Probably Corsair Crossbows, Castamir's Rangers are certainly there, yeah, Corsair Crossbowmen. Ardenheim Lancers are hidden as well, Balagaya Footmen, and Elkarondas Legion hidden on the riverbank. So, I will make a bit of a cut here because I'm not entirely sure when this battle is going to begin. I don't know how the attackers are going to handle this. It could be quite a shortcut, but we'll see. It is a battle, it's quite long. So I'd imagine there's going to be at least 2 periods in the battle where it's more transitional phases, this being the first of them. So I'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So here we go, the first volley actually coming forth from Y2K's Orc Archers shooting up onto the cliffs, and a quick return volley as well from the Greenway Garrison Archers. 2 kind of similar units in terms of their functionality. I'd probably give the slight edge to the Greenway Garrison Archers in a situation like this. The Greenway units, one thing you can say about them actually, is that they are reasonably solid for what they are. They don't tend to do much damage, but then you don't need much damage when you're going up against a unit like the Orc Archers. You also have a terrain advantage, a distinct one, in a situation like this. But this is a bit of a problem. The Ballista can shoot right through these lines, and even though they're only going after a relatively basic unit like the Greenway Garrison Spearmen, numbers are going to be important here for the defenders, because they certainly can't really rely on the overall quality of their units, and they need to be able to hold the line. Everything the defenders have, really, is going to be dependent on how well they can use their skirmishers. So if it comes down to either just pure numbers or pure quality in melee, the attackers should, in theory, win. There are some Numenorian steel bows making their way towards the front line. I'd be quite surprised if they actually started using their ammunition now, and they are. I think that is a little bit of an error, although perhaps not. It kind of depends on which unit he's going after. If he is going after the Minhiriath sharpshooters, which I believe he is, it's not actually the worst target. They're useful in melee and they're very dangerous at range, so actually, not the worst idea at all. It's not the best target, but having said that, sometimes you can't really afford to be picky as the attackers, and you just need to dive right in and put the defenders under a little bit of pressure. I'm not sure the crossbows should move forward anyway, to be honest. There's not any hugely important targets to go after, but so far it really is just trading blows up on these cliffs over here. One thing I can certainly say is you really don't want to be using the steel bow ammunition on Greenway Garrison Archers. That will be seen as an absolute win for Lango and his Cardolan forces. Narun moving across, there you can see the ballista bolt streaking through the air again. Doing decent damage over time, but it's not like they've gotten a really effective volleys off yet. But it could only be a matter of time before that is the case. Quite a lot of space here that Rhun could advance into, but I doubt they are going to choose to do that with Umbar's firing squad ready to pepper them up on the way across the bridge, especially the Rangers. It would be a real problem. This is the situation I mentioned where the Variag Mercenaries would be more useful than the Narrim. It's not as if the Narrim... The differences between the 2 units, obviously, I know I keep banging on about the comparison because people keep bringing the Narrim, I think, because they look cooler. There isn't actually a huge deal of difference between the 2 units, but the addition of the shield on the Variag Mercenaries does make enough of a difference to the point where they would be much more useful in a situation like this. If for no other reason than they would absorb more punishment from the Balaketh Marksmen. Balaketh Marksmen themselves, however, are the superior archer regardless. And you can see there they are taking several shots, but most of those fighting men of Umbar shrugging off those hits with relative ease. And so far, more armour-piercing arrows coming in here. I mean, you can't accuse the Warius of being stingy, which many players often are. He's going after the sharpshooters again though, so I mean, it's not as if he's going after the wrong targets. He is going after the units which are more useful. I thought he was for a second there going after Greenway Garrison Spearmen, but no, those hits were just a byproduct of going after the sharpshooters that were nestled in behind. So I mean, fair play. This isn't a particularly solid front line, and the Gwathlo trackers are hidden, ready to start firing on these units as they cross, but this front line, if I were the attackers, I'd be quite tempted to just try and smash this defence to pieces as quickly as possible. Based on how long this battle is, this is going to be a bit of a game of cat and mouse. It is going to be a game of chess rather than a street brawl. Wathlo trackers are going to start shooting in as well. They've got a little bit more damage to them in comparison to something like the Greenway Garrison archers, but they're also more fragile. So swings and roundabouts, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue, to be fair. Minhiriath archers probably going to start shooting in. They really don't want these orc javelins to get into a position to weaken that front line, but Y2K, here he stands with his javelins. More arrows coming in, and either way they get what they want. Either they absorb archer ammunition with a unit that's very, very cheap, or they get free javelin damage into this front line, or as it is right now, some sort of combination of the two. Plenty of these Greenway Garrison spearmen though continuing to get cooked. What have we here? Are we about to see a melee engagement? Well, kind of actually. The Ardenheim Lancers pushing across the river. These goblin trackers already taking damage, presumably from the elven archers that are up on the hill over there, the Harlingen Guard. But no need for that anymore. The goblin trackers completely defenceless against the Ardenheim Lancers as they move forward. Angmar's skirmishing faculties are fairly limited at the best of times, but consummately dealt with there by a combination of Umbar and Lindon. They make up for one another's deficits actually really rather well. A heavy duty and more of a faction that's about their guile and their skill. Orc javelins continuing to get hit. They're trying to be broken here, you can tell from the use of the fire arrows, but so far the orc javelins continue to, annoyingly I suppose, hold their ground. Numenorian steel bows moving forward. I mean, to be honest with you, the steel bows may very well be the better target. Valkoth tribesmen moving in here as well, although those steel bows are shooting their payload right up into the air, so perhaps not too much of a problem. Orc fodder being moved forward as well to prevent any sort of aggressive action from the defenders. I don't think the attackers need to worry too much about that. I highly doubt the defenders would be willing to risk it all in some sort of grand infantry push across the river themselves. It would be an interesting move if they did, but somehow I doubt it. Those Valkoth tribesmen are very similar, I suppose, to the Orc javelins in terms of the kind of unit that they are, but also getting absolutely lit up by fire arrows. People of Rhun love fire though, so not looking like routing anytime soon. Gondor holding themselves in reserve, definitely Cardolan the ones that are taking up the slack here in the early game. Willing to trade blows with the opposition like this. They have the cheaper units to do so. A lot of their entry-level units are built for battles like this. The two more quality-centric factions in Lindon and Umbar are actually further north along the river. Angmar still not too eager on move. I mean, Angmar, to be fair, are more of an all-or-nothing kind of faction when it comes to this sort of thing. When their allies start moving across the bridges down in the south part of the river, I assume that's when they will just go all in against Lindon and hope for the best. And they could have a good deal of success in doing so, but there's not really a great deal of nuance when you're playing Angmar in a situation like this. When you decide to attack, just commit everything forward, and that is how Angmar do. Well, a lull in proceedings here, which is quite interesting. These Valkoth tribesmen, 17 of them, firing in. Cardolan's poor front line, not even had a chance to test their mettle in melee just yet. Having to just stand their ground against angry skirmishers. These steel bows out of ammunition at this point. Going to be filling their role as makeshift line infantry, taking some damage actually. Still a steady stream of arrows being used on that cliffside position. Orc archers, did they just run out of ammunition? They have pulled out their little clubs and hatchets, so it is very, very possible that is the case. Wathlo trackers have moved their way forwards a little bit now as well, so they're a little bit more exposed, but then there are no archers that are really going after them. But unfortunately for Lango here, he's having to use his ammunition on such depleted units of javelins, and it's a really good situation for the attackers, this, honestly, because either the defenders have to pour such valuable arrows into such a depleted and weak unit, or all of those javelins in that unit will slowly but surely be used on that front line. Either way, the attackers get a win out of that, to be honest. Unless, of course, this is used, the Ardenheim Lancers. This is why cavalry on the defence can be so useful, because they can be used in situations such as this. Forward comes Son of the Dunedain's Ardenheim Lancers, already been used in the bridge in the north to deal with the Goblin Trackers, now being used to deal with the Orc Javelins. They need to be a little bit careful, because the Steel Bows will be able to chuck out a bit of damage in melee. And then there's, of course, the Orc Fodder as well, which are spears. Terrible spears, but spears nonetheless. Balcoth Tribesmen continuing to throw their jabbies in. Orc Fodder moving onwards. Rhun infantry moving forward, so the first threat of an infantry assault from the attackers here. This, however, will give the Gwathlo trackers something else to shoot at. Maybe into the backs of the Moran infantry is not the worst target. Not a completely useless unit after all. There are the Balcoth tribesmen. I mean, this is all well and good. Cardolan can try and blunt the skirmish potential of the attackers. However, that will put the pressure on Gondor in the late game to be the closer for the defenders. It is a 4v4 as well, so this is a sort of battle where the defenders can afford to take these trades a little bit more so perhaps than they would be in a 3v4 or of course a 3v5. Now, oh, there is an infantry engagement going on. I'm actually surprised they committed themselves forward. I mean, this isn't likely to go anywhere from Y2K. He has Moran infantry on the front line, but other than that it's fodder, it's javelins, it's archers, units which are genuinely terrible in melee, but this could be the true goal. Bunching up the Cardolan front line and allowing that ballista to shoot right down the Cardolan ranks. There are Minhiriath men-at-arms on the front line as well, which will offer a little bit more damage in comparison to the pikes, but Cardolan trying to reorganise their front line at this point. Numenorian steel bows, unironically the best unit in melee that's on the front line at this point, including the Moran infantry. 22 Orc Javelins firing into, I think, the Greenway Garrison spears, but at this point I think they're just happy to hit something, do a bit more damage to Cardolan, who are continuing to stand in the face of this harassment and now genuine pressure from the attackers. And this is where, in particular, the Greenway Garrison footmen are going to be earning their keep, I think, as they can hold this line for a good long time. Bit of Gondor infantry coming forward as well. They may as well be committed to the front line, a bit of extra line infantry. Which will be needed actually in the face of something like these steel bows. Like I said, this whole first defence at least is going to be based around the pikes from the southern Arnorian kingdom. We come from Moran infantry. Well, javelins still, like, this is the thing, if you leave a unit like this just depleted rather than killed or routing, they still have all their ammunition. They can still use it, it just takes them longer. And slowly but surely they're going to be able to gain a good amount of value. Having said that, a bit of friendly fire into the back of the Numenorian steel bows there. Forward comes Maximum of the Sarnax and Balakith marksmen from Son of the Dunedain also firing into the side of this front line. And the addition of those Numenorians on the front line is having a positive impact for the attackers. Also something that's having a positive impact for the attackers is the impact of those ballistae. Now, over here, Eastron clansmen making their way across the river as well, so Rhun seeing a bit of an opportunity. Now that the attack is underway in the southernmost crossing, they are going to be advancing across the middle crossing, which is neat to see. I think they're going to need at least one unit of quality across the way here, otherwise these Eastron clansmen are going to be mopped up fairly quickly, especially when you consider Ardenheim Lancers getting a really nice charge there into these Men of the East. And then Umbar will also be able to close the jaws with their heavy spears, and Alcarondas Legion, who will beat the brakes off the Eastron clansmen in melee. They are far the superior line infantry unit. So a bit of quality needed, and I mean, if the attack is underway here for Overlord, he really should be thinking about just going all in, because that would perhaps encourage Angmar to do the same, and that would really put the defenders under the cosh. And we would really see what they are made of in melee. Bit of arch support. Going after the Lindon unit, so he is choosing the right targets with his archers to go after. Umbar much better at absorbing that kind of range pressure. Lindon far less so, even their shielded units, their armour values are low enough to the point where you can actually have some joy there. But these strong clansmen are also getting surrounded. Spears, some of their number are routing now. They are outmanoeuvred and outgunned. Meanwhile, More units on the way forward, a more genuine push now. Numenorian cohorts on the way forward, so it's now sink or swim really for this front line. Cardolan were able to get away with just having a bunch of basic units on the front. Here come some bandits that are firing their javelins in, but between the Blackguard of Barad-dûr and the Olag High, clearly the intention here is to cause this front line to collapse from an attacking perspective. The Citadel Guard moving forward. A bit of armour piercing wouldn't go amiss against the trolls, but some axemen would probably be even better. Chuck out even more damage. But Gondor are at least helping Cardolan on the front line. They're not content to just allow Cardolan to be the one to take the fall here. Plenty of damage being poured in by these defending skirmishers. Olag High continuing to swing in a wide arc with their clubs and hammers. The whistle of crossbows, javelins and arrows. Real combined arms when it comes to their ranged presence here. Bandits to get one final volley off before they're going to have to pull out their weaponry to go after the Olag High in melee. They're not going to do too well in melee against the Olag High, which should really go without saying. They're the routing Eastron clansmen. Orc Maulers on the front line, bit of AP, going to be useful against Cardolan and especially Gondor. And there go the Minhiriath men-at-arms, so this pressure was always going to tell eventually, and Gondor are now pushing forward, but this really should have been the sort of thing that was preempted. Cardolan's morale, it's not terrible, like it's not as bad as a lot of people think, but it is also still more fragile than your average. That, however, is really, really good there. Trebuchet, seeing the fact that this front line was routing, saw the perfect opportunity to get some really telling hits on the Mordor advance. Most of this stuff is trash, to be honest, but it's in such high numbers that it's still worth doing. Meanwhile, here in the north, Lindon just plugging right up this front line. Snaga Stalkers trying to move their way forward, trying to establish a bit of a beachhead on the other side of the river. Harland and infantry are there to stand in the way, and they are going to carve their way through these Snaga with relative ease. Goblin trackers firing some arrows, but Lindon pretty comfortable here in the north, pretty comfortable so far. And they do have, of course, the long way they can retreat as well, so it's not all over if even this southern position falters first. Eastron clansmen, now they're getting backed up by the Scion Rim, which is a bit of a different proposition for Umbar. They will need to exercise some of their better units in order to bring down the Scion Rim with any sort of efficiency, but that was a pretty disastrous attack from Rhun, to be honest. Sending forward only lower tier units on their own is never really going to work too well. Melkor's Chosen are in behind enemy lines now though, so this all of a sudden is becoming a truly chaotic fight. Bandits having to muck in melee, but to be fair, like the infantry portion of this army, I think Mordor and Numenor have actually bottled it a little bit here, which is surprising. Because their infantry assault is collapsing. The Melkor's Chosen are now also getting pinned between Citadel Guard and Ardenheim Lancers, which is bad news for them, more so because of the AP spears they find themselves rubbing up against. But yeah, I mean, in spite of that, like, they had all of the hallmarks of a successful attack going on there. The front line for the defenders was buckling. They had units and cavalry, high-tier cavalry at that, in behind enemy lines. And yet they didn't commit any more units forward. That's surprising, because that gives the defenders a bit of a reprieve, to be honest with you. And perhaps puts them in the ascendancy. Orc javelins firing away. Ballistae firing across the river. There are the Elkarondas Legion. And still the flaming shot being utilised. Scion Rim taking a ton of damage from the Corsair crossbow, so Umbar having to flex their muscles a little bit, but as soon as they do, it's being done very, very well. The Flag Rim would really beat the brakes off Balagaya footmen in pure melee, but it's all of the Umbar skirmishers here which are a problem, and another charge. I have to say, Umbar's done really, really well so far. I think Rhun have played into their hands horribly, really, in this engagement, at least with regards to infantry. But all of the decision making for Umbar so far has been very good, and they've been supporting their allies with their cav and their skirmishers as well, which is always a good sign. Meanwhile, Lindon, once again, still just using a single unit of line infantry to plug the gap here. It's about time that Angmar sent forward something of a little bit more quality than Snaga, because it's fairly clear that Snaga are not going to be enough to bring down Lindon all on their lonesome. Trolls would be a good countermeasure to Lindon stacking the front line with too many pikes. Harland and Guard continuing to fire away. They can take their pick, really. But Angmar are another one of these factions which do pretty well under arrow fire, so the Harland and Guard aren't going to be as effective as they could otherwise have been. And course, their crossbows getting harassed. I mean, here we can see that this cavalry back here from Umbar, it is going to be depleted by this sort of aggressive push, but they are going to do damage to these strong crossbows. They probably do need to get out of here now, though, because Sion Rim are on the way forward. And what little remains of these Ardenheim Lancers is going to be mopped up. I'm not entirely sure this was the best idea. This unit of Ardenheim Lancers was still potentially really useful. I can see why he did it, but it wasn't executed in the best way, and that a lot of that can be down to the fact that you're attacking on a bridge. Like the pathfinding on bridges in Medieval 2 is really poor. So you can't really blame Son of the Dunedain too much for that, but I wouldn't take an engagement on the bridge unless it's just an infantry grind most of the time, because you lose fine control of your units, generally speaking. That ballista has been effective so far, though. It's been doing its damage more slowly rather than the trebuchet, which has done damage in great big blobs. Moran infantry broken there, but that ballista's damage is going to be adding up over time. Seafarers of Nindamos, really, really useful armor-piercing damage. Right into that unit of Gondor infantry. Forward come more Moranon infantry and Numenorian cohorts still fighting hard on the front line. I mean, the Axemen of Sarnak are going to struggle at keeping themselves alive, but at the very least they'll do more damage than most would against Numenorian cohort. They just need to land some blows before they inevitably get sliced through by those fighting men of Numenor. Plenty of routing units. Yeah, and they're coming forward with another attack here, but I feel as though they're missing a bit of a trick here, actually, the attackers. I personally feel as though they actually need to attack with more of what they have. I think Mordor seems to have been more into that sort of thing than Numenor on this occasion, but I think going in sort of 3 distinct waves, I think, plays into the hands of the defenders here, because you're not really going to have too much of a next wave if things keep going in the way that they have been. And so far, the defenders have got things under control on this crossing. Rhun as well have not had the best of luck, and you can tell actually because Umbar are pulling back, and they are going to engage with that front line there. Balagai footmen and Sion Rim, spear to spear. The numbers of the Balagai footmen here. No, the Sion Rim should still win that in pure melee, but it's going to be the support coming in. Rhun at least do still have a good amount of reserves. Angmar have got lots of reserves, and the Trolls were committed forward. They took tons of damage as they did so, but this front line is looking much more flimsy now. Gundabad Guard on the way across. I mean, it's good that Angmar still has all of this in reserve. It gives his team some hope going into the rest of this battle, but I can't help but feel as though the longer the battle goes on that Angmar don't go all in against Lindon, the more his team get depleted, essentially. If he waits too long, there won't be anything of Rhun, Mordor and Numenor left to help him. And if that's the case, it's not going to be enough for him on his own to try and win this. Alcarondas Legion are pushing forward, Umbar smelling blood in the water. Rhun coming across to try and support with some E-strong crossbows. Ardenheim Shadowbow shooting the Alcarondas Legion as they move forward. There are the Seafarers, Temple Guard. There goes what I can only assume to be the Mordor General. Where Garrison Archers are up there. Wardens of the White Tower are on this front line. The additional AP of the Minhiriath Sharpshooters will be useful, but to be fair, Numenor's mainline infantry here has really shown its quality. The Cohort and the Shield Guard are still digging out some kind of success here on this front line, in spite of all of the difficulties they've gone through. I get the sense the defenders are actually thinking about going back to the settlement. Might be a little early to do that, but if that's what they want to do, then so be it. If that is what they want to do, then this should be the sort of thing which the attackers are seeing, and Rhun and Angmar should be, I think, pincering Lindon at this point, because Lindon clearly still want to fight on this front line, but Rhun, perhaps after having their noses bloodied after their initial attempt to cross the river, will be a little bit more cautious now, which could work against them in the long run. The London Elves continuing to hold back a unit of Gundabad Guard arriving on the front line. Are they routing? No, they're shaken though. They touch the front line and then run away again, tails betwixt their legs. That is a confusing decision. Lindon Marines still back here. Maybe it was just a misclick. I would assume that's the case. There's no other explanation. Rhun have got an opportunity here and they really need to be taking it. Arrows coming in. Narrow and Iron Guard are now leaving. Lindon, I think, are also going to take the long way around in their retreat. I mean, this unit of Scion Rim is not going to achieve much all on its own other than its own demise. Yeah, more units are being peeled off the front lines at this point. So they are preparing to go back to THARBAD. I think they've set themselves up for the late game pretty well here, the defenders. I would say that they've had the better end of most of the engagements. It's kind of hard to tell when you get one that's as violent as the fight that often springs up around this choke point. But I do believe the defenders have had the better of it, especially because of the northern engagements, which have gone really well, I think, especially for Umbar and also for Lindon. But they are going to retreat here, which is an interesting move. It gives, I think, actually, the attackers a potential way back into this fight, because the Witchers would be much more difficult to use when crossing the river and going across the bridge. Like I said, though, when it comes into the close confines of a settlement like this, if you're not really paying attention to the Witchers, they can blend in. And a couple of volleys from them could make life pretty dicey and undo all of the good works of the defenders so far. Wouldn't be the first time such a thing has happened, though. There goes some Ardenheim Shield Guard. I don't think they're actually going to be able to get away. Point blank javelin volleys there from the Seafarers of Mindamos. And these Ardenheim Shield Guard are going to be left in the dirt. Some routing orc archers as the Numenorians celebrate around them. The duality of man. And that is pretty much going to be that. I don't think... well... there is still an engagement happening on this front line, so these Lindon pikes and Harlingen infantry will ultimately be left behind as the rear guard. And I think Rhun are going to come over to sandwich them. Indeed they are. Flag Rim. Shield Guard continuing to get peppered as they try and leave. This is pretty much going to be it. I mean, they're shooting at them as they retreat. Narrow and Iron Guard trying to cover their retreat with a few volleys. But that will pretty much be that. I would imagine the attackers aren't going to go forward with individual units. I think they're probably going to regroup themselves, which would explain... it would also account for a lull in the battle as well. And the Harland infantry, yeah, they're looking like they're going to rout the trolls. Doing some damage. Rhun also approaching now, and with a rear attack I think that's going to be it indeed. Harland infantry broken and fighting to the death. Angmar still should have plenty in reserve, and they will be quite reliant on Angmar, seeing as they conserved their strength more so than the other players on the team. I think Mordor and Numenor in particular have taken quite a lot of damage. The Warriors is moving forward. You know what, I'm going to make a little bit of a cut here because I think I can see which way the wind is blowing here. And it's going to be, I mean, there's still pockets of fighting going on, but there's not really much to say about them. So I'll make a cut here and we'll rejoin when the attackers are well and truly getting their assault on the settlement itself underway. So I think now is the moment we will actually rejoin. There has been a little bit of skirmishing going on, but it's lasted pretty much since the cut went on, and it wasn't really anything that you could really say much about. You can see there's a few bodies here and there, but nothing too substantial really. Now, however, that the northern wall of the settlement is also coming under a little bit of pressure, we should start to see some movement happen. The Kabul's Shadow Guard being targeted by the Minhiriath archers, as well as some of the Gamp Rim over there, so good choice of target here from Lango. These strong crossbows will be returning fire as well. I mean, you can take your pick really. There's plenty of viable targets on this occasion. There is actually a melee engagement going on over here as well, albeit some very depleted Gundabad Guard and some increasingly depleted by those javelins. Flag Rim not going to really be the sort of thing which is going to be able to push its way through here. I do understand, however, why the attackers are being a little bit more cautious and really stacking their armies up and only attacking when they're sure that they can back themselves up. Because in a 4v4, that's what you need to be as the attackers. You do need to be a little bit more cautious. I often criticise attackers for being too cautious when they have an army's advantage, because they really don't need to be. Their main strength comes in the fact that they can overwhelm their opposition and crush them with brute strength most of the time, depending on the map. But on this occasion that isn't necessarily the case. They need to make sure that they take good melee engagements and make sure that their quality can carry them over the line. Having said that, hovering around in front of all of the defending skirmishers for too long is not the way to go about business, because that's how the defenders can win this battle. And that is how I think they've done so well up until this point. E-strong crossbowmen. A good unit to have in this situation though, because they are clearly trying to skirmish with the enemy. The Minotaur Roman gatekeepers are there. I'm interested to see what they're actually firing at, because there can be no doubt about what the E-strong crossbows are firing at. I'm not sure, however, what the Minotaur are going after. They are going after the Cummel's Chosen. Can't really argue too much with that. Minhiriath archers are going to be the ones to set up some sort of front line. There's still 8 E-strong crossbows here, but they are looking like routing, which is to the surprise of absolutely no one. They are getting far too close for comfort. These Minhiriath, yeah, they rout. Never even got into melee. They had ammunition still, so I'm not entirely sure what the point of that even was. But for Lindon Marines, you can see there that the Narrim have taken horrid damage from something. It must have been a unit of archers which arrived and then left as quickly as they arrived. Gundabad Guard, more Gundabad Guard on the front line, so they're trying to make things happen, but it's Lindon's stronger pike now, the Mithlon pikemen, which is holding things down on the front line, which is going to make things all the more difficult here for the attackers. And there... I see. This is something I haven't actually noticed before, but something that can be done. A good skirmish position which can be used to shoot into the back of that front line. I can't believe no one's ever used this before, to be honest. The son of the Dunedain using his rangers in there, which is going to do horrid, horrid damage. The more that you look at this, the more you have to say that yes, the attackers still have good strength remaining, but the longer the battle continues in this sort of vein, the more likely a defending victory really is. They're going to try and make something happen here with their Scourge Raiders, which is fair enough. The Scourge Raiders should do really, really well if they get a clear shot into those Mithlond pikemen, which is exactly what they're going for. And Demon's Hunter knows that, which is why he's trying to wriggle away from the front line. A few good volleys from those Scourge Raiders, and there they are. Axe throwers in general, if you can get them into range of Lindon, can be really, really effective, because the lack of armour piercing really isn't a problem there. Unless, of course, you're talking about the Noldorin units, in which case armour piercing is absolutely what you want. There's always an exception to the rule. Camul's Shadowguard and Flagrim, fortunately for Rhun, are armour piercing. Unfortunately, however, the Noldorin units are of such high quality that you really need extra oomph in order to get through them. I suppose they're trying to provide their javelin support, and it is working. They have sufficient numbers and sufficient support that they will end up winning that fight over time. But Numenor and Mordor have got less in the tank to contribute to this late game. They committed so much to just getting across the river that you'd have to say they're not in as good a position to support now. Numenor still have their bodyguard units, which is it's a big deal. Pharazim Swordmasters in particular are a very, very strong unit, but the defenders have got plenty of tools of their own which can deal with that sort of thing. Harland infantry moving forward, a game of cat and mouse being played here on the northern approach, trying to bait one another into an engagement on their terms. They don't want to be drawn into range of these Scourge Raiders, Lindon, for very good reason. But again, it's definitely a slow-paced one. It's all about the skirmish, this battle, really. And like I said at the start, I'd be surprised if the defenders don't win as a result of that, because if you're making it all about the skirmish, in a 4v4 siege, generally speaking, the defenders are going to have the edge there. They're going to have the edge in most sieges, given the nature of rangers. But at least in 4v3s and 5v3s, you can commit so many skirmishes to your army compositions that you can just overwhelm them with volume of fire. That's not the sort of thing you can do as easily in a 4v4. Especially given the versatility of all the skirmishers from the defenders here. You've got Cardolan with their crossbows. I mean, just even in a single faction, Umbar have got plenty of versatility with rangers, archers, crossbowmen, javelins, all sorts. 8 Balaketh marksmen, some Lindon pikemen being committed to the front line. Also, however, a fresh unit of or a reasonably fresh unit of Gambrim arriving. Seafarers of Nindamos, Numenor still with a little bit of support that they can provide to these runic assaults. That armour-piercing phalanx is exactly what you need to help finish off these Noldorin Guard, to be honest. Really, really liking that. There's a lot of damage done to those Mithlond pikemen just in behind, so the attackers are giving it a good go. They're trying to pull the defenders around a little bit. Some out of ammunition Lindon guard forming up a front line. Half decent spears in melee. There's another javelin volley coming forth from those 4 Lindon Marines, and they're going to do some pretty nasty damage to this unit of Guardians of Cardolan. It's the sort of thing that you have to accept as the attackers, though. Defenders are going to have good positions to dig in, generally speaking. And the Cardolan outpost is quite a cramped settlement. Lots of narrow little passageways, and there are definitely some really good vantage points that can be utilised. Guardians of Cardolan will easily have the beating of the Lindon Guard in melee, I think, purely because the Lindon Guard don't have the damage. There goes Cardolan's general. I mean, that is a big deal. Cardolan's morale is not the best, but I also don't think Cardolan have got all that much remaining. I mean, they've got their Minotaur Roman gatekeepers. Oh, there's another assault happening through here as well. And there are the Nazgul from Y2K. Forward come the Temple Guard. So Mordor taking the lead with a bit of support from Numenor over here. But Mordor had very little left. I mean, what they had left was elite units. And they are putting on some good pressure. I mean, the Temple Guard, very strong. Should be able to defeat the Alcarondas Legion. And there are still some Nazgul in there as well. But as soon as these Nazgul are out of the way, the Dunedain captains and the Fountain Guard can push forward and help deal with the Temple Guard. So this really is just buying time for the other choke points, really. I don't think there's anything left. 5 Shield Guard. Yeah, I mean, just these Nara and Raw Guard which can be committed for, which is not insubstantial, but they're more of a defensive unit more so than something which is going to cleave through a front line with any haste. Scourge Raiders are here. This is quite interesting. Is there an assault happening this way as well? No. So this is the other potential entryway into the settlement. Only 3, but they only really have the numbers to attack 3 choke points, and even then one of them was going to be a sacrificial assault, which is exactly what the remainder of Y2K's army is going to be committed to doing. Meanwhile, Noldorin Guard are still on the front line. Still, there are Elven Pikes. Is that 2 units of Noldorin Guard now? Looks like there's more than there was a second ago, but I guess not. I guess that is just still a singular unit. Out of ammunition, Seafarer's being committed forward as well, trying to do some damage. I think the time has come for Angmar to swing into action and be hyper-aggressive at this point, because they're running out of wiggle room here. Eventually, that Rhun Numenor assault on the front, the Numenor Mordor assault over there, is going to fall apart. They have more numbers over here that can be used, but they're running out of time with which to be effective, and it's actually a similar story as to what happened on the river. I feel as though Angmar could have been more aggressive, and it would have been to his team's benefit. As his allies slowly bleed out, he's conserving a bit more strength than them, but it's not really serving much of a purpose. Here is the Trebuchet. And they're just trying to break the Nar Rim, I guess. I mean, I would have thought they would go after the trolls, but it doesn't really matter. At this point, I think the defenders probably feeling pretty confident about things, just the way the battle has gone so far. Rhun has got a little bit more in terms of reinforcements they can commit over here, but it's really difficult when you're going into a choke point against quality pikemen and you don't have any skirmishers to back that up with. Pharazim Swordmass is still here, as well as some Valkoth tribesmen, and the Carmel's shows some really good quality actually over here, which can still be committed. So that attack still has some legs in it, unlike, you would have to say, this one, where the Temple Guard are broken and fighting to the death. And what remains, there are the Nara Royal Guard. They were killed off very quickly actually. Some Eastron crossbows are coming forward to try and give a hand in melee, but far, far too late. If they were going to be committed, it should have been sooner, and even then the attack wasn't going to succeed based on the support of 87 Eastron crossbowmen who are going to quake in their boots at the sight of the kind of units they're being tasked with trying to kill in melee. There is that one of the Royal Guard has at least made it this far, 2 of them actually, with their blue capes, where they will be finished off by the Raven Hounds of Caer Andros. Incredible scenes. Mithlond pikemen are going to move forward as well. Still the Trebuchet just hanging out. Minotaur, Roman gatekeepers have now repositioned themselves over here. I mean, they have a perfect shot in here, so they'd be mad not to. As soon as they've used up all their ammunition, they'll also be capable halberdiers. I mean, so far I think that the judgment of the defenders has been good, but to be honest, in a 4v4 siege like this, the judgment of the defenders is less taxed than it is in a 3v4 or 3v5. Instead, it's the judgment of the attackers which is called into question more so, and I think on several occasions they have been found wanting. I can understand why you aren't just going to be brainlessly aggressive and charge forward, because rangers will really do the business against you. However, to allow it to become such a skirmish-dominated battle, in my opinion, is a bit of a mistake. We'll see. It could be that the individual quality of units like the Witches and the Pharazim Swordmasters can still dig out a victory for the attackers, but that will be down to more individual brilliance than planning. Some people would say that I know all about that, supporting Manchester United. Castamir's Rangers, still here. And there goes the final Royal Guards. We lasted quite a long time actually, especially seeing as the Ravenhelms, they don't hold back in terms of the damage they're capable of dealing. So now the defenders have got a bit of a choice. They've got plenty of units over here which can be utilised in potentially other ways. Yeah, they're routing. Are they going to go just purely defensive, or are they going to try and go around and surround some elements of the attacking army at this point? It'd be interesting to see how they decide to handle matters. For Lindon Marines, defeat is a distinct possibility. They're not the best in melee, to be fair, but they're spears in melee, so they can still contribute. But it's the Pharazim Swordmasters at this point which are doing the business. There's Nimlothian Honor Guard in there as well, but they've seen a little bit more action than the Pharazim Swordmasters, and that extra hit point can be such a brutal, brutal thing. Those Minotaur Roman gatekeepers now out of ammunition, so they're going to be committed to the front line. Useful again with those. I think they're more. I mean, they have like the shape of. There is a name for this weapon. It's not a billhook, because a billhook is sort of more slender and it doesn't have this axe bit on the end. Is it a vulge? Might be a vulge. Not a bardiche, because that doesn't have the pointy bit or the hook. Rim. There are the Corsair crossbowmen trying to avoid as much damage as they can at the hands of these Rim, but so depleted at this point. Not much in the way of range support for this front line anymore, and to be fair, Angmar's starting to turn the screw a bit. The defenders, do they have what it takes? I'm not sure what these two units are doing all the way back over here. These Wardens of Velos Tyrion, I think they're just biding their time waiting for a bigger assault to come through this choke point, but they could wait for too long. Those Rangers really are the key to success at this point. I'm surprised the Pharazim Swordmasters are leaving, but it could be that the additional support being sent over here is going to be too much for them, so they are going to leave the front line. Those Wardens of Velos Tyrion need to be used well though. There's plenty of reinforcements that the defenders can use. Again, individual quality of units. There's still an Nazgul left alive. Yeah, I mean, it goes to show how tough the Nazgul are. Even when they're isolated like this, they're still posing a challenge. This is why they're so good when you combine them with other units, because the damage is not focused on the Nazgul, and it takes so long to bring them down. They still have ammunition here in these blackguards? They do. They've got those harpoons drawn. I'm not sure why they bothered to leave the front line with the Pharazim Swordmasters only to commit the Balkoth tribesmen. Because these Balkoth are not really going to achieve much. The quality of the units they're fighting is simply too high. No matter. What else? Fountain Guard. Corsairs. I mean, pike to pike, under normal circumstances this would actually be a pretty fascinating fight, but one that I may actually even... I mean, either way, it doesn't matter, because the numbers that Angmar have are going to be too much for this depleted unit of pikes without support, but Corsair crossbows are up here. And also the Wardens of Velos Tyrion are now firing, which I think is fair enough, because you need to deal with these pikes somehow, and it may as well be with rangers. The battle's still very much in the balance. The balance of power is still dead even, and I would say that while we have seen a lot of good works done by the defenders, I have lost track of the Witches myself. I don't know where they've gone. I would Be surprised if they were dead. There's some Carmel's Shadow Guard moving forward. 2 Nazgûl still live, so they actually lived through that punishment. But lived maybe is the wrong word to use with the Nazgûl, but they are still there. Here come the Gamp Grip. The attackers trying to make the defenders sweat a little bit, clearly, because they are starting to have more of an impact as the battle goes on. And we are now at the business end of proceedings. Do the defenders have enough left, and will they make the right calls of when to commit certain units? Because the Fountain Guard, so dominant in a melee fight. Still got Alcarondas Legion left alive, so 2 Fountain Guard, Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers. Still got Royal Guard, they've still got those Rangers, which have been using their ammunition. Not these ones have used their ammunition long ago. There are the Hammer Guard. Which are on Black Guard are also moving forward, so Angmar, perhaps the last roll of the dice for them outside of the Witches, potentially. They may be dead. Don't know where the Witches could have gone. Well, no, because this is 2 dead Witches here. So they must be around here somewhere, surely. Although it's entirely possible, I suppose, that the Rangers saw them. Yeah, there's 2 more dead Witches with the officers and the banner carriers. So, I mean, if there is still 1 left alive, that's something, but they may have lost the Witches to the Rangers, in which case, good observation by the defenders, and that may also be the key to their success. I mean, these Noldor and Blademasters have been caught horribly out of shape, however. Demon's Hunter sandwiched between the 2 Angmar bodyguard units. The Noldor and Blademasters are strong, but between the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard and some Trolls, that's going to be too much for the Noldor and Blademasters. A bit of an error in judgment there. Lindon, pretty poor, you'd have to say. Pharazim Swordmaster and Carmel's Chosen now joining the front line, so this is it. This is the attackers trying to put the screws to the defenders. Do the defenders still have enough left? Fountain Guard, such a domineering kind of unit. Some Lothian on a guard. Alcarondas Legion still fighting. Just trying to make sure that these units can't join the defenders elsewhere, I suppose, these Carmel's Shadow Guard, but how long is that really going to last? Not very, you'd have to say. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. There's the Gatekeepers. Royal Guard and Black Guards. Pushing in, trying to kill off these Shadow Guard as quickly as they possibly can. I always found it interesting how there's Eastern architecture in the Cardolan outpost. It's weird. Especially seeing as not all of it is Eastern architecture. Sort of a mix of the Mediterranean tile set and the Middle Eastern one. One player has admitted defeat. Could be Mordor. Noldor and Blademasters really taking a lot of damage, which are Hammer Guard also. Crossbows having to bank their shots, but they will still do a bit of damage here to stuff like the Witcher and Black Guard. There goes the Warius with his Ardenheim Shadowbows. Castamir's Rangers are here. Warns Valos Tyrion, who looked to have taken damage actually. Must have been the Ardenheim Shadowbows. But even so, if they managed to kill the Witchers with those Warns Valos Tyrion, they more than did their job. Pikemen for extra measure as well. Rotting Meat being deployed. And there we have that rather cool looking officer for Angmar. Bit of Blackwatch Legionnaire with a mace wielded one-handed like a snow orc. Also, Crossbows victory seems certain. That is extremely surprising given the fact they're up against Witcher Hammer Guard. I would assume that is going to change pretty soon. The Warns of Valos Tyrion do still have ammunition. Círdan is horribly bloodied up, actually more so than most of his men. They're going to fire point blank into those Black Guard and to the Trolls. Will they get another volley off? I mean, they're here now, so they may as well stay there. They don't. Trolls do interrupt them, and they're not going to be the best against the Trolls. They've got good melee defense, but the Trolls are going to do really, really big damage to them. So the defenders look like they're going to lose over here, and the Warius also getting in behind enemy lines. They need to shut these guys down pretty fast. The Fountain Guard are on the way over, but they've taken damage. Big damage. And it's not looking good for the defenders all of a sudden. I think actually, here in the late game, their judgment has... It's almost like they got too comfortable. They've allowed the attackers in, and allowing attacking rangers into a position like this when you still have reserves is criminal. They are ultimately going to chase them off, but several volleys of needless damage. Angmar's general does fall. I mean, the Northern Blade Masters have shown themselves in that engagement to be really, really strong, but still. Units like this have just been loitering around at the back doing nothing, and you could argue at this point some of those front lines are a lost cause, but with rotting meat, the only ammunition you have left, yeah, it's looking actually pretty bad at this point for the defenders, which would be a real turnaround. I mean, if we're talking about individual quality of units, the fact that there are still Pharazim Swordmasters on the field means that the defenders are surely going to be sweating it out now. Still Noldorin Blade Masters alive. These trolls have been used pretty well here in the late game. Ones of Elos Tyrion taking point blank fire. Alcarondas Legion going to try and finish off this depleted batch of pikemen. Rotting Meat nearly hitting a unit directly. Sometimes you see the direct hits of the Rotting Meat kill a unit, but not this time. Corsair Blackguards coming in here. They're going to try and help the Noldorin Blade Masters out, but I think it's a bit too little too late for that. But over here, Fountain Guard. That one unit of Fountain Guard that got horribly depleted. Look at all of this, look. Dead pikes. Yeah, it's not looking good. There aren't enough Fountain Guard on the front line at this point. Narunahara Royal Guard can hold the line for a long time, but they're not really going to be able to dish out the kind of damage necessary to kill off both Camul's Chosen and Pharazim Swordmaster. And if that wasn't enough, Warius has got up on top of this wall after the Hammer Guard cleared it out. He has now got a really good shot in there, so good use of the Rangers. Arguably better use of the Rangers than the defenders have engaged with so far. Alcarondas Legion are being pushed forward now, but have they left it too long? I mean, Angmar pretty much gone at this point, so this attack is done for. So it's all going to come down to that frontal assault. It's real close, this. I think the defenders still have the strength necessary. They need to really bottle up the engagement and try and surround the quality units that they're still dealing with. These Rangers are going to try and do as much damage as they possibly can as those units approach them, because they are going to get engaged in melee and they will ultimately get destroyed up here, but damage they can do could still be absolutely vital. Shadow bows themselves are made of tough stuff with that additional armour. What's going on here? Does Trebuchet still have ammo? Was that genuine Trebuchet fire? I can only assume it was. It's not green fire, so it's not as if there was a stray Witcher. Well, that possibly changes things, although they're going to be really depleted. I mean, if they can deplete this force enough, then that force which is chasing those Ardenheim shadow bows along the wall is going to be the key. Not entirely sure whatever happens to the Royal Legion of Armenelos, to be honest. In a kind of strange battle. 5 Fountain Guard up against a few Camul's Chosen. Interesting battle again. 28 Pharazim Swordmasters remain. That's still a substantial amount of them. 28 Camul's Chosen as well. Quality stuff. They do need to shut down these Rangers more quickly than they're doing. They're making a bit of a meal of this, to be honest, the defenders. I'm not entirely sure why those Alcarondas Legion were chasing them and then went back along the wall again. Error in judgment for me. Because if they don't stop these Ardenheim shadow bows from firing, they are done for. They're doing their best here to use some of their ranger ammunition, but they took point blank fire. There goes the Gondorian general. That was the Trebuchet, wasn't it? So Blackguards on the way forward. At this point, this ranger unit is so depleted that the DPS they're going to be laying down is not going to be enough to really affect the battle in the way that they would have wanted. But this is a high quality battle. I can understand why Lango wanted me to show it. If he himself can use his trebuchet as well here, but still has ammunition, it could be the difference between victory and defeat. Because you can see, Pharazim Swordmasters still haven't taken another loss. Camul's Chosen have, but the units they've got on the front line just aren't capable of dishing out the kind of damage they need against units of this level. And there's also still those Gamprim as well, so they still have an all-important Phalanx unit in the late game, which can be such a pain to deal with. And again, they're leaving those Ardenheim shadow bows to their own devices. Like, I can understand the risk that they need to take. Noldorin Blade Masters should be able to deal with these shadow bows. And they need to get those units on the front line. Son of the Numenor. Again, been a little bit lethargic with those Alcaron Legion. After dealing with Mordor over here, maybe caught resting on your laurels a little. And that may end up being the difference here. The Trebuchet, I think, perhaps in panic terms, trying to get good shots, but there are too many buildings in the way from the angle that Lango just chose. Of course, they have blackguards moving forward, trying to do the business in melee, but all they can really do is buy time. They need that. They need the trebuchet shot to be like a point blank one, and even then it might not be enough. Because at this point they don't really have anything in melee other than that one unit of Alcaron Legion. They've got some Manatar Roman Gatekeepers, I suppose. 43 of them, maybe not all is lost. They still do have those 7 Noldorin Blade Masters as well. One more has fallen since last we saw. They do need that trebuchet to do the business though. Otherwise the bodyguard tier nature of these units is going to be too much. And drip feeding individual units in, such as the Corsair Blackguards, going to be too much. Manatar Roman Gatekeepers are going to get into melee here. Pharazim Swordmaster trying to pull through, and actually in doing so, taking a bit of damage. They do still have a bit of ammunition in these Warns of Alos Tyrian. As depleted as they are at this point, the margins are fine enough to the point where 3 Rangers delivering some consistent damage may make the difference. They see the danger the Trebuchet represents, they're going to go after them. Alcaron Legion, 7 Blade Masters. I mean, yeah, it's going to be close. Really, it's going to come down to whether or not the Pharazim Swordmasters have got the quality. But the fact that they've actually stretched the Pharazim Swordmaster unit out a little bit may give the defenders the way back in that they need, because the Carmel's Chosen will not enjoy being in a straight up melee fight with an armor-piercing unit like the Gatekeepers. The Gamp Brim could still yet have something to say about that. There's only 17 of them remaining and they're shaken. Still a couple of Fountain Guardsmen. They're taking damage as well from the Wardens of Alos Tyrian. Gatekeepers need to be a bit careful because they're wavering. They're trying to push into the Carmel's Chosen, and I don't think that's a good idea at all. Doing such things could be what leads to your defeat, because you need these Gatekeepers in melee. If they rout, it's done. You're finished. 22 Alcaron Legion. I mean, the Trebuchet crew is not going to last too much longer. Pharazim Swordmasters. There is the... Well, obviously they're going to kill the Trebuchet crew, but they need to do it quickly so that they can reinforce their Easterling brethren. Where are those Noldorin Blade Masters again? 7 of them could be such an important thing in this battle at this point. The addition of those Alcaron Legion having the impact, Carmel's Chosen doing their best, but there's only so many of them left now. And through sheer numbers, they may be the ones to pay the price here. Well, there is the Trebuchet crew. Carved apart. Well, they actually ran his Trebuchet crew away, so he's going to give the Pharazim Swordmasters the runaround here, Langer. I mean, there is a school of thought from me that says maybe you should just get into melee and force Lango to take the risk of using that trebuchet. Because if he hits his own men, they're routing, and at that point, you win. If you don't get these Pharazim Swordmasters back onto the front line, however, you end up dying in melee, because Rhun are not going to be able to hold back all of these units on their own for too much longer. Where are the Wardens? Yeah, the Warrior, he needs to make his decision at this point. You can't afford to keep chasing that Trebuchet crew around. If you do, any hope you had at winning this battle is done, and you've fallen directly for the ploy. You just need to get back into melee. And I think he's honestly left it too long already. I think that might be the final thing. You can't just afford to stand there and block access to the trebuchet. If you think that you can win in pure melee, it's a risk that you can try and take, but I don't think that's going to be accurate, because you're going to have 7 Noldorin Blade Masters, plenty of Alcarondas Legion, relatively speaking, considering the level of units that we've got left. The bit of AP bites that the Gatekeepers offer. It's such a risk, honestly. It's such a risk to just stand here as is. People just love to ring me up when I'm doing my recording. It's like they don't understand. It's like they don't get it. I'm not even going to do them the respect of answering it. Bloody annoying. Anyway, Pharazim Swordmasters have perhaps learnt their lesson a little bit too late. Can they still... I mean, if any unit can fight their way out of this situation, it would be the Pharazim Swordmasters, I suppose, but they've already seen quite a lot of combat, so they're going to be quite bloodied. The additional bit of AP could be absolutely vital in sealing the deal here. Noldorin Blade Masters. And the Trebuchet crew could be committed to melee here, because, I mean, at this point you can't really shoot them, because if you get friendly fire, you're done. The Noldorin Blade Masters, though, surrounding them, and yeah, it's going to be a defending victory here. The Noldorin Blade Masters getting in and amongst the Pharazim Swordmasters will do enough damage to the point where even if they all die off, the rest of the units left standing will be able to finish the job. Trebuchet crew coming in here just to add more bodies to the mix. And we'll go up to ×2 speed, I think, to see this battle home. Is there anything left? There's still a Fountain Guard taking on 2 Cummel's Chosen over there, but that really is a footnote of an engagement at this point. I mean, a really topsy-turvy kind of fight this. It was quite a simple fight on the front line. One that the defenders felt like they did all they can in, and then, or could in, and then retreated back. The fight for the settlement, though, was very complex. Very intriguing battle, that.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
And I can see why Lango wanted to show it. And it took a little while, but here it is, on the channel finally. And the last of the Pharazim Swordmasters being dealt with. And in the end they do last longer than the Cummel's Chosen. And it is... actually no. It is a Cummel's Chosen banner carrier, which is the last one left standing. So technically Rhun are the last one standing.
We are victorious.
And there we go.
Our soldiers have fought and died well today.
And that is going to be that. So a very entertaining battle there from Lango. And like I said, better late than never. We got there in the end. Interesting to see the different fates of the armies, really. Shaun of Gondor getting bullied, really. I mean, I suppose it's because he didn't engage on the front line so much on the river. And in the settlement, actually, he was the target of quite a lot of what was good that the attackers were doing. The defenders, though, did very well. I think it could have gone pear-shaped for them. There were a few moments, a few judgment calls where I wasn't quite sure. But in the end, I think it was the attackers who made the worst judgment calls, and that is how I think the defenders ended up winning this battle. I don't know what happened to the Witchers, but they must have been committed either too soon, or it was just good, sort of good observation by the defenders, which I'm willing to say that's the case. But yeah, so let's see what did the damage for Lango. Gwathlo trackers, 323 kills, that's very good for them. 210 kills. Plenty of units breaking 100, as perhaps you would expect, given the situation. The Trebuchet did okay as well. I mean, for such an expensive unit, you may say that's not that much, but they did cause a lot of routing on the river battle as well, which certainly helped. All of those things added up, and considering how close this battle was, it was definitely It was definitely the kind of thing which could have made a difference. Snowball effect, after all. Can't be too sure. But yeah, big thank you to Lango for sending me this battle replay all those months ago. And big thank you to all the players that were part of this battle replay as well. Some of those names that we see may have well have been earlier on in their development at the time this battle was played. But yeah, I do actually, by this point, I should have done the channel update video detailing exactly what's going to happen, because I do actually know now what's going to be happening. I learned yesterday, as at the time of this recording, I believe it's the 6th of February that I'm recording this. But I do now know what's going to be happening in the near future. And I would have already given a channel update, so you will already know what's going to be happening. But it could be, by the time this replay comes out, that those changes and those upheavals would have already happened. So it's kind of interesting to note that. So I'm going to be recording in advance to give myself a little bit of leeway there. But yeah, it's one of those things that I really won't know until it happens how things are gonna go. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.